Hey everyone, welcome. This is going to be a build showcase for my own home-brewed twist on a classic build. Cast on crit forbidden Rite, but with Hierophant instead of an Occultist. I say build showcase, not build guide, because this build is unabashedly expensive. It's not like a multi-mirror build or anything, but current gear is easily in excess of 300 div, and I don't even have a Mage Blood on the build yet. So with that in mind, let's dive in. The playstyle is spin to win. It is extremely smooth and laid back. I'm usually playing with one hand, and I don't feel any danger at all. There wouldn't even be much for the left hand to do, except maybe shield charge out of danger. So why Hierophant over Occultist? I just love builds that scale offense and defense with the same mechanic, and that is actually what we're doing to an extent with our energy shield. We're going to be using int stacking, among other methods, to scale a 9 to 10,000 energy shield pool. Hierophant is also offering mana as energy shield scaling, so we're doubling up on the effects of int stacking. And keep in mind, the higher your energy shield, the higher your base damage from Forbidden Rite, so that's what we're trying to do here. And then just as a bonus, Hierophant is giving us much more room for auras, due to its ascendancy, making us more zoomy than the Occultist variant because we can fit in the haste aura pretty easily. This build has advantages like endurance charges, higher energy shield pool, enough mana regen to use a rune dagger without a mage blood. That's big. Smoother power charge ramping, and access to other Templar classes forbidden jewels, which is also really huge. But what do we lose compared to the Occultist? Well, we lose access to easy wither, an extra curse, an extra power charge, meaning that we kind of have an overall slightly lower damage ceiling. Can we do anything to mitigate or make up the differences? Well, the extra power charge can't really be made up since Occultist is going to have access to all the other sources of plus power charge that we do, so that's just going to be a flat loss. On the other hand, Wither can come from a Crucible tree on our weapon, and Curse Limit can be raised with an Anathema ring, which, as a bonus, can have a good percent int, percent strength corruption on it. Let's take a look at some highlights of the skill tree. So we are going to path a very wide route to maximize our split personality distance because we are using int and strength split personalities. We are a Chaos Inoculation build. We are going to take Iron Will to double dip on our strength scaling because Iron Will affect our damage with strength. Also, we're getting strength effect from our Shaper's Touch gloves and Joffrey's Sanctuary armor. We are over here using the standard Militant Faith Jewel to get Inner Conviction, maximizing our power charge scaling because we are still leaning into that, despite not being an Occultist. It's still a very effective way to scale crit and damage. We are using Forbidden Jewels, so I started by using a cheap pair of Radiant Faith ones. These have since spiked in price. When I paid for those, they were like 10 div total for both Radiant Faith, and that was giving me a lot of extra energy shield. I was able to upgrade and afford a pair of Righteous Providence jewels instead. So instead of all the extra energy shield, we're getting int, strength, and crit per your lowest of strength and int, and that's huge for us because we're already stacking those two things anyways. So this basically solves our crit single-handedly, and as a bonus, it gives us so much extra strength and int that it almost makes up the difference lost from the energy shield from no longer having Radiant Faith. So that's a huge upgrade. And since Radiant Faith has also become so expensive, I would advise just skipping directly to Righteous Providence. There may be some other options that are cheaper, but I think that's the way to go if you can afford it. Let's talk gear. So like I said, this is a pretty expensive build. We are using Ashes of the Stars. We are using the two top-end split personality jewels. We've got a pair of 35% efficiency reservation efficiency clusters. We've got an Aegis Aurora with a good Crucible tree, and we've got a relatively expensive crafted weapon, as well as crafted belt and boots, all fairly expensive there, although not breaking the bank. We actually did get some items relatively cheap for being kind of off meta, but they weren't cheap, just cheaper than they could have been. We got an Anathema with a good corruption. We got a +1 power charge crown, which is like a fraction of the price that it's been in previous leagues. We got an impossible escape that allows us to take nodes, take the charisma node over here. Also been extremely expensive in previous leagues. We've got Awakened Cast on Crit, a perfect double corrupted Joffrey Sanctuary. You couldn't ask for better than this. A Watcher's Eye with good mods. And again, the Forbidden Jewels, I would love to say that I was using the inexpensive ones when I was using Radiant Faith that I'd got for 10 div. Those were inexpensive at the time, but those have spiked in price. Let's talk defense and offense. So defenses, we've got anywhere between 9 and 10,000 energy shield, depending on how good your gear is. We've got 30k armor, almost 40k armor now. So almost 200k effective HP. We've got max block and near max spell block with glancing blows. Aegis Aurora is restoring 700 to 800 ES per block. We are stun immune as long as we've got our flasks up. We are totally ailment immune. We have high energy shield leech and ES on block, ES on hit. We've got hindering enemies, and also we are moving at high speed and we are phasing, which means it's a very important defensive layer. We are not standing where the enemy is aiming. That's an underrated defensive layer. Be elsewhere. Now on offense, we're looking at around 20 to 25 mil DPS with reasonable path of building boxes checked. Our base damage on Forbidden Rite, it scales with our energy shield, like we said. So that's the flat base damage. Our percent increased damage is coming from Iron Will strength stacking, transfiguration mods on our helmet, and power charge scaling. Our more damage multipliers are coming from, again, power charge scaling, as well as our zealotry aura. We are attack crit capped and spell crit capped thanks to our Forbidden Jewels, so that's huge. Our crit multi is coming from the crit multi support gem, as well as, again, third time, power charge scaling, hard to beat it. It's doing so many things for us, as well as we were using Assassin's Mark previously. Now we're using Sniper's Mark, so we are getting enemies take increased damage instead, which wound up with our crit capped. Thank you very much, Forbidden Jewels. Sniper's Mark winds up being a better DPS choice than Assassin's Mark. We are getting extra projectiles from an alt quality gem, from GMP, from the helmet enchant, and from our Dying Sun flask when it is up, which while mapping or doing simulacrum is all the time. We are getting increased cooldown, which is really big for damage on this build, from the Awakened Cast on Crit boots and the belt, and of course Awakened Cast on Crit, the gem, as well as the boots and the belt. Our attack speed, which we want to get as high as we can to match up to the cooldown recovery rate, we're getting that from Haste, from Onslaught, from Tailwind, and from the Cyclone gem itself. We are actually getting Explode, which is a huge quality of life bonus that I love from a Cluster Jewel mod. So just the general problems that we had to solve with the build. So the Hierophant Ascendancy is going to take some of your damage to mana. You can't avoid taking that Ascendancy node. It's on your route to an Ascendancy node that you absolutely need. So you are going to be taking some damage to mana. What that can do is it can kind of pseudo-stun you if you are cycloning around. If you take damage to mana, despite our incredibly fast regen on mana, there will be a split second where you are at 0 mana when you take damage to your mana. And even if it doesn't stop your Forbidden Rite from firing for more than 1/10 of a second, it will knock you out of Cyclone and cause that animation to restart. So it's like a mini stun. So it ended up being really important to solve the mana problem. And the solve was just to get Cyclone down to a cost of 0. Not terribly difficult to do because most of the support gems are not actually supporting Cyclone, and so the cost starts relatively low. We take a minus channeling skills on our ring and some reduced mana cost elsewhere, and we're good to go. Crit chance is tough to solve without Righteous Providence, so if you don't have those yet, you have to sacrifice some other offense, so you've got to sacrifice some of your medium cluster jewels to get crit chance instead of using projectiles. Let's see. The build is just not quite uber viable. I'd say that's a problem to solve unless you have a good player controlling it, and I am not. So the solve there would be to be a better player than I am, and I think this would be just fine against Ubers, but I get squirrely, so I don't do as well. Possible upgrades that you could look at from where we are right now. You could swap out Anathema and a Power Charge Anoint on your Amulet for a Despair on hit ring with high attributes, for Mark on hit and a Whispers of Doom Annoyed. I'm not sure if I'm a fan of that. I would need to play with it. You could craft a better weapon for this. I've got like a quite good weapon right now, but there's room for an even better one beyond this. I would love, of course, to get a Mage Blood. It frees up a Cluster Jewel slot. Currently using a Cluster Jewel slot to get stun immunity, and you could instead switch that over to a projectile damage because, of course, with Mage Blood, you can take a flask with reduced stun chance and just get it to 100% there. So we would love that for the extra proj medium cluster, as well as boosting up our resistances high enough that we could go Melding of the Flesh, which would give us even more tankiness on an already tanky build. I would love to do that. I love Melding of the Flesh. The bottom line here is that this is a fast, tanky build with above average DPS. It does great in a lot of different content, so I can do Deathless Wave 30 Simulacrum. I'm feeling safe delving at a 400 to 500 level. And as a bonus, just if you're a little bit of a hipster, this takes a different approach from the more common version of the build, and that appeals to some people. But all in all, I can recommend it if you're looking for something a little different that is a smooth, tough money sink of a build. So I really appreciate you tuning in. Pop any questions you got down in the comments, and I'll see about doing a more in-depth guide on the gear and gems. So thanks, everybody. Take it easy.